What makes the upcoming National Policy Conference one of the most important in the history of the ANC? Is the succession race likely to influence key policy decisions at this conference? And are there any lessons that the ANC can learn from Zimbabwe under the ZANU-PF leadership? And why has the ANC leadership eventually agreed to grant the 101 veterans an audience during the event? What time is it? It's question time. Khotong, and welcome to the show. My name is Mpotsedu. The ANC goes into its National Policy Conference at the weekend, starting from Friday. These apparent divisions within the party having dominated news headlines for a while now. Some analysts blame this on the ANC's failure to let go of its historical image as a liberation movement to a modern political party. Others say personality cults seem to have invaded the oldest liberation information on the continent, with individuals scrambling to assert their personal influence instead of continuing to unite as a collective. While rigorous deliberations are expected to dominate the event, others expect the succession race and names attached to it to influence the direction of proposed policies. Some academics say liberation movements disappear within 20 years of assuming power, and this remains to be seen with the ANC. But what is the position of those who have a better knowledge of the political dynamics of Zimbabwe? We are live, and therefore you can call us and air your views. The numbers to dial 089-110-4210, our Twitter handle at QuestionTime24. My guest today, the panel is made up of all the learned people in the world. Dr. Mcebisi Ndlechana is Associate Professor at the University of Johannesburg. And we're also honored to have former Deputy Prime Minister of Zimbabwe, Professor Arthur Mutambara, and from our studios in Pretoria, Professor Lisiba Tefu. I'm the only one who's not a prof today, and I'm motivated. Gentlemen, let me welcome you to the show. And Prof. Mutambara, thank you very much. We're going to talk about your book as well, which I know you'll be launching next week on the 3rd. I believe, and I'm willing to put my head on the block, this coming weekend is useless. It's a waste of money, waste of time, waste of an opportunity, because nothing is going to come out of this ANC policy conference. They are more worried about December.
Well, it's never a waste of time for people to meet and deliberate, because obviously there's a crisis.
Yeah.
If you don't deliberate, it means you are resigning yourself to that mess, and it's never a good thing. The ANC as a party remains very instrumental. It is necessary for South Africa as a liberation movement with a national footprint.
Yeah.
Right? Of course, there are people who are determined to retain the status quo because they are benefiting. There are those who also want to change the ANC, right? So the balance of forces is perhaps equal, right? And the anti-change people are the incumbents who can manipulate their incumbency in their favor. But the ANC, there's a window, a possible window of opportunity there to change things, because the ANC has been hurting electorally.
Yeah.
So now, this December, you're not talking about succession, but you're also talking electability in 2019.
Correct.
There are young folks, Sihle Zikalala, Mzwandile Masina, who, even though they might support JZ, Jacob Zuma, but are also keen to remain in politics and be re-elected in 2019. So there are loyalties to certain leaders, like Jacob Zuma, for instance, because he made some of them. But at the same time, JZ is pretty much at the end of his career. And these young folks are still looking ahead to a brighter political future. So there are a lot of calculations to be made. So it might look a little bit bleak at the moment, depending on where you stand, but I think the changing dynamics are likely to influence things towards change.
Professor Mutambara, the ANC goes into this policy conference amid calls for radical economic transformation. KZN has supported the call for land redistribution without compensation. Radical policies. You've been there. You've served with Comrade Robert Mugabe. And looking at what the ANC is going through at the moment and going into this policy conference, what would you caution?
Number one, there is no alternative to radical economic transformation. There is no alternative to a land revolution in South Africa. And by the way, you need both. A land revolution and radical economic transformation. There is no question, there's no debate. However, don't allow a good idea to be corrupted by a few. In other words, radical economic transformation as a good idea can be abused by a few to empower themselves at the expense of the majority. A good idea such as land revolution can be abused by a few to empower themselves and their families at the expense of the generality of the people of South Africa. So when you say radical economic transformation, it should be about the majority of the people of South Africa. When you say a land revolution, it should be about the people of South Africa. And by the way, ANC must not govern as if they're governing for themselves, as if they'll never get out of power. Radical economic transformation as a program must be above party. The National Development Plan, ideally, should be a party for all the political parties in South Africa. The EFF must be on board. The ANC must come to terms with the fact that it could become unpopular and lose political power. And South Africa will still exist as an entity. This nonsense that the ANC will rule until Jesus Christ come should be challenged and rejected for the foolishness that it encompasses. So the lesson is, yes to radical economic transformation, but the people must remain at the center of the discussion.
Professor Tefo, let me bring you in here. Professor Mtambara sounds very much local.
He does. You see, this quasi-revolutionary nomenclature has had its day. You want to talk about radical economic transformation, radical X, radical Z. Why suddenly radical now, after 23 years? And I'm glad former Premier is there. It is when they were about to lose power in Zimbabwe that they began to be radical. And the rest is history. There is no longer a country in Zim except a name. And we run the risk of doing the same in South Africa, that on the eve of the demise of the African National Congress, now they want to sound radical and come up with radical policies. For me, I heard your introduction. The lost opportunity lies in the fact that soft tissues that would enable the ANC to transform itself are not the ones that are being addressed. There is a document called Through the Eye of the Needle that speaks to the caliber of the leadership the ANC should opt for in order to advance and to preserve itself as an organization. But if you don't talk about those and you want to sound revolutionary, yes, as Mwalimu Julius Nyerere once said, people don't eat slogans, people eat food. The ANC is almost at the verge of its demise, but it can redeem itself, and it's never too late to do the right thing.
Okay.
But in there lies the caliber of the leadership that they ought to opt for. Otherwise, the tragedy of Africa, not necessarily of the ANC, is the tragedy of poor lack of visionary leadership.
Joshua, you are in Table View. Welcome.
Good day, Bo. I would like to ask, I'm also from Zimbabwe, and
okay.
I would like to ask Mr. Mtambara that how can he describe Zimbabwe? How are we going to come out of this fear of this regime which we have in Zimbabwe? Because I've seen a lot of activists, but they don't speak about how the regime in Zimbabwe is really treating those people who are stuck in that baton of fear. They cannot express themselves, and our leadership cannot go out and really say this is what is going out in Zimbabwe. In South Africa, there is a bit of freedom, but there is need for really to get people who will govern it properly, but it's better than Zimbabwe.
Thanks very much, Joshua.
The
And even the
two
small.
views are very important and correct. In Zimbabwe, a good idea was abused. Land reform, land revolution. It was abused as a political tool to retain power. Land was taken and corruptly given to a few, but more importantly, those given land were never given security of tenure. If you misbehave, the land is taken away from you. So land reform, land revolution in Zimbabwe became a political patronage system to retain political power. Again, a good idea being abused by ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe to retain power. Yes, there's a danger in this country for the same strategy where a good idea, radical economic transformation, can be abused by the ANC to retain power, in the same manner. Now, what can be done? I think it's incumbent upon all the citizens of Zimbabwe in the diaspora and in the country to be active and become masters of their own destiny by being involved in the political processes. But it's a tough call because the electoral conditions are not free and fair, and there are challenges for those who are active in the country. But granted, a good idea can be abused and can be used to retain political power.
But land invasion in Zim were not started by the ZANU-PF.
Yes.
They were started by ex-combatants who had not been given the promise of freedom, land. Right? Any national liberation movement must be followed by land redistribution because people are crying out. They're saying Izole to Africa. Maibuye. That is not an empty slogan. So the national grievance then continues in the absence of redressing those inequalities. Now you have a little bit of that. People invading land here and there. You cannot sustain a democratic society in the face of these massive inequalities. And you see these inequalities all over, right? The suburbs, the schools, you go to the township, it's a different situation altogether. Guys your age look 20 years older than you because of poverty, right? So inequality creates bitterness because some people have made it, others haven't. So they start asking themselves, what is wrong about us? We were promised. And these folks don't have a stake in the system. When they don't have a stake in the system, they don't give a damn.
Hold it there. Tabang, you are in Northwest. Tabang? Okay, Tabang is no longer there. Let's take a quick break. And when we return, we continue our discussion with my esteemed panel today. 089-110-4210. And we shall be talking about this Arthur G.O. Mutambara's book when we return. What can we learn from Zim as a country? This is question time.
If you ask this Irish master whiskey distiller why sometimes whiskey is spelled with an E and sometimes without, he'd say,
"Oh, to be sure. Are you fair so good, look? It's the whole thing. They're a backing to get off in the whiskey without the E."
Yeah, didn't catch that. But if you asked us the difference, we'd tell you that every whiskey from around the world is spelled without the E, except for Irish and American whiskies. Cheers. Tops at Spa. Good whiskey, good advice, no Irish accents.
Welcome back. You're still watching Question Time, and like I said today, all the professors are in studio. SABC Arthur Mutambara, Lisibatefu, and yours truly, of course. I'm the only one who's not a prof. 089-110-4210. Felix, you are in the Mpumalanga. Welcome.
Thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome, Felix.
Oh yes, you see, this fallacy that we have political power and now it's time for economic power, it's a fallacy. The only reason why we fought for political power was for us to transform economically. Political power is just a tool. The end, our dreamland is economic empowerment. So when they now stopped, after taking political power, it's madness.
then why did you take the political power in the first place? It's like people are hungry, but we want to go to the kitchen and cook food. But we have to take some people away from there. When we got to the kitchen, we slept. We said, now that we have the kitchen, then let us sleep. Now, after 23 years, when almost half of the people are dead, we now say, oh, no, we need to start cooking food. That is madness.
Okay.
Thank you.
Felix, thank you very much. Well, we must get people in the kitchen. That's very important. Prof, how does the ANC seize this next 5 days to redeem itself in the hearts and minds of South Africans?
Well, it depends which ANC you're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
There's a big part of the ANC that is all about self-preservation now. You see, because they have inaugurated a patron-client kind of state where they've been feeding off state resources. And they've been so blatant about it that they didn't care to hide because they thought they would be in power forever. Now all those things are coming out, and them coming out raises quite sharply the possibility of legal prostitution. So these folks need the state control to play around, to protect themselves, the same way Jacob Zuma has been doing for the last 10 years. He's been saying he's innocent, but he's been running away from courts, right? And he can do that because he is president. So you have those who don't care about the organization, nor about the country, but about themselves. So they are determined to keep the status quo, this ruin, that's rot that the ANC is in. Then you have those who are, as I was saying earlier, thinking of reforming the ANC. So you have this clash. And I mean, I do agree with you to some degree because of the corruptness of the ANC. So the processes and elections, they are engineered to deliver an unfair, dishonest outcomes, right? But then you cannot surrender to that because then it means that you will never correct anything. You always have to fight. Hopefully, the balance of forces, you know, comrades always say the balance of forces at some point might just pit towards your favor.
Prince, you're in Mpumalanga. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Paul. Yeah, I just want to ask Dr. Maybe SABC, maybe didn't we lose the fight at Codesa just to prevent maybe the civil war? We compromised a lot, so freedom charter couldn't be applicable due to this joint national government. So that's why there is a good question: why radical now? You know, so that's why my suspicion is that we lost the battle at the Codesa, not the professor stage. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'll get him to respond. Let me just go to Pretoria quickly. Let's allow Professor Tefo to just jump in there. Prof, let me allow you some time.
Well, look, interesting points from my colleague Mcebisi there. The ANC right now is in a situation whereby either it saves itself from itself, but I'm arguing it cannot. The history of the liberation struggle tells me once a liberation movement reaches this stage, it cannot redeem itself. They will have to take a break from leadership for 5-10 years, regroup, and at least cleanse themselves and weed those unwanted elements that have corrupted the organization. That's the first part. The second part, and primarily for me, is recognition of the fact that once you get alienated from the electorate, you need so much redeem yourself before they can at least regain confidence. As the situation is right now, from the head and to the most rural and remote municipality, corruption is pervasive. Can they get rid of that? I doubt. Then you come back to the land question. Yes, indeed, it was not about air-conditioned offices. It was about the land. Because the land is about identity. It's about history. And it's also about our aspiration. And indeed, our success is predicated on our successful use of the land. But most importantly, it's leadership, leadership, leadership. Because the caliber of the leadership you have is the one that will enable you to utilize the mineral resources to the betterment of the wretched of the earth.
Kingsley, you are in Senton.
Yes, please.
Go ahead.
Good evening. I think, for me, I feel the blame is being misjudged, being misplaced. Everyone keeps talking about Zuma. we're not really focusing on the main issues, which we know it's monopoly, kind of, in South Africa.
Is it the same white monopoly capital?
I wouldn't call it white. What sort of monopoly? Any kind of monopoly. If you look at it, when the CODESA came up, we had a BE kind of. Only few had the opportunity to claim stakes in different entities. Now we've come up with a mining charter which automatically gives more to the community. South Africans are not imbibing. They're not happy with it. The only thing I wouldn't like in that mining charter is having 51% for new businesses. But if we have professors like this that are not even that are well enlightened about this, playing politics, still blaming the president when he's trying to, instead of supporting him, then I think would be in a very we still have a long way to go.
Okay, thanks very much, Kingsley. Prof, let me bring you in here. Elusive Zimbabwean dream, in search of this dream in Zimbabwe. Do you think it would also be elusive here in South Africa?
Yes, in fact, I'll answer that question and also answer the questioner from we've just said a few words. There are structural problems. All these negotiated settlements are flawed. CODESA 1, CODESA 2 was flawed. Lancaster House Agreement was flawed, primarily because the white negotiators made it clear that what you get in 1994 is political independence. And they protected in the law, in the constitution, their economic interests. At Lancaster in Zimbabwe, the white negotiators, the white power structure, ensured that what we got in 1980 was political independence. And for the first 10 years, we couldn't even change our constitution in Zimbabwe. So they made it a point in these settlements that the economy was out of reach for the black Africans. So yes, there has to be a new effort to say, yes, we've gotten political independence. We must go for economic empowerment. It's not going to be easy because the agreements that brought freedom in South Africa was flawed. The agreement that brought freedom in Zimbabwe was flawed. That's why in our case in Zimbabwe, it has been elusive. But in our case, democracy has been elusive. Peace has been elusive. Stability has been elusive. Inclusive democracy has been inclusive. But more importantly, shared and inclusive economic prosperity has been elusive. Okay. And in the book, I'm trying to document the efforts of my generation, starting from high school to now, in terms of attempting to make a difference and deliver the dream for Zimbabwe. But more importantly, politicians like the ANC leaders must start to think about the party and think about the country. A national vision for South Africa above party, a national economic destination above the ANC. So when they lose power, we continue in the same direction towards an economic destination which is shared by South Africans.
But does it mean, therefore, Prof, that your generation sold out in Zimbabwe? I mean, you were also part of that. I don't even know what to call that thing that you had. You know, did you have power there?
We tried, we are trying, we have not succeeded.
You know what also Zim tells us is the adverse impact that corruption can have on a country. The current incumbents, they've looted to a point where they know that once they're out of power, and certain atrocities were committed. Yeah. Now, power for them is protection. It's obviously illogical that you can have a man who's 93, 95, I don't know how old he is. President Mugabe sleeps during the day. Anyone cannot be president at that age. Yeah. But he is protecting a certain faction. And these factions, I mean, the tragedy of it is that these individuals cannot agree even among themselves who should succeed Mugabe. Right? So because of this infighting, you would rather not only kill ZANU-PF, but the country as well. So we should prevent these things as soon as they surface. We should get rid of them so that they don't get entrenched in the system, because once they get entrenched in the system, then it breeds dictatorships.
Okay. Now I wish we had an hour, but we still don't have.
I wish to make a comment here.
Oh, Prof, we have run out of time, unfortunately. But Professor Mtambara, the book is being launched next week at Gibbs in Ilovo. Is it in the evening?
Yes, 6:30 p.m. on the 3rd of July at Gibbs Business School.
All right, thank you very much. And indeed, we encourage people to go and read. Let's hear what he has to say about this elusive Zimbabwean dream. Maybe we may be having our own elusive dream here in South Africa. But that was question time for today. A big thank you to my guest and to you for watching the show. From me and the crew, I'm Holz.